The gun barrel pressed against Lillian Harper's temple felt colder than the November wind whipping across the Oklahoma prairie, and the man holding it wanted her signature on a deed that would strip away everything her father had built. She could see her ranch house burning in the distance, black smoke curling into the gray sky like some terrible omen, and knew that Theodore Marsh and his sons had finally made their move. They had been circling her property like vultures for 3 months, ever since her father died, leaving her alone with 2,000 acres of prime cattle land just outside Kingfisher, Oklahoma, and no husband to protect her claim. It was 1887, and a woman running a ranch by herself was considered either foolish or desperate, and Lillian was neither, though she understood how the world saw her. "Sign it, Miss Harper," Theodore said, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "Sign it, and we will let you walk away with your life. You cannot run this place alone. Everyone knows it. You have lost 6 head of cattle this month. Your fences are falling apart, and winter is coming hard." Lillian's hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage so pure it burned through her veins like wildfire. She had watched her father work this land for 20 years, had helped him drive cattle through storms and droughts, had learned to rope and brand and track better than most men in the territory. When he died from pneumonia last August, she had buried him on the hill overlooking the western pasture and promised his grave that she would keep the Harper Ranch alive. But Theodore Marsh owned the bank, owned half the businesses in Kingfisher, and had 3 grown sons who did his dirty work without question. They had been sabotaging her efforts from the start, cutting fences, spooking cattle, and now burning her barn to force her hand. "I will see you in hell first," Lillian said, meeting Theodore's pale eyes without blinking. His eldest son, Marcus, stepped forward with a sneer. "That can be arranged, sweetheart. We gave you a chance to do this the easy way." The sound of a hammer cocking made everyone freeze. Lillian turned her head slightly and saw a man on horseback at the edge of her property, a Winchester rifle pointed directly at Theodore's chest. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing a worn leather duster and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face, but she could see the hard line of his jaw and the steadiness of his hands. The horse beneath him was a big roan gelding that looked like it could run for days without tiring. "The lady said no," the stranger said, his voice carrying across the yard with absolute authority. "I suggest you gentlemen mount up and ride out before I decide to make this personal." Theodore's gun wavered slightly. "This is none of your concern, stranger. This is business between me and Miss Harper." "I am making it my concern," the man said, urging his horse forward a few steps. "And I count 3 of you and 1 rifle that holds 15 rounds. Now, I am pretty good with mathematics, so that leaves me 12 bullets after I put all 3 of you down. Seems wasteful, but I will manage." Marcus reached for his pistol, but the stranger fired a shot that kicked up dirt right between the young man's boots. The roan barely flinched at the rifle's report, well-trained and steady. Marcus jumped back, his face going pale. "Next one goes through your kneecap," the stranger said calmly, working the lever action to chamber another round. "Your choice." Theodore slowly lowered his gun and took a step back from Lillian. His face had gone red with fury, but he was not stupid enough to test a man who could shoot like that from horseback. "This is not over, Harper. You have until spring to make your first mortgage payment, and we both know you cannot manage it. When you default, the bank will take this land legally, and there is nothing you or your hired gun can do about it. Then I guess we will see each other in spring," Lillian said, forcing her voice to stay level despite the adrenaline making her heart race. "Now get off my property." Theodore gestured to his sons, and the 3 of them backed toward their horses, keeping their eyes on the stranger. They mounted up and rode out at a gallop, leaving only dust and the smell of smoke behind them. Lillian watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned to face her unexpected savior. He had dismounted and was walking toward her, the rifle held loosely in one hand. As he got closer, she could see him more clearly. He was probably in his mid-20s, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. His face was tanned and weathered from years in the sun, with a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. There was a scar running through his left eyebrow that gave him a dangerous look, but his expression was surprisingly gentle as he studied her. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. "No," Lillian said, then looked toward the burning barn. "But I cannot say the same for my property. That was 6 months of hay and my tack room. The horses got out, thank God, but everything else is gone." The stranger followed her gaze and grimaced. "I am sorry. I got here as fast as I could when I saw the smoke from the road, but I was too late to stop them from lighting it." "You do not owe me an apology," Lillian said, turning back to him. "You just saved my life, or at least saved me from signing away everything I own. I do not even know your name." "Russell Garrett," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I was passing through looking for work, heading down to Texas for the winter, but I figure maybe I should stick around here for a while instead." Something in the way he said it made Lillian narrow her eyes. "Why would you do that? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Russell looked at her for a long moment, and she felt something shift in the air between them, something she could not quite name. "Because I know what it is like to watch bullies try to take what does not belong to them, and because I have a feeling you are going to need help around here if those men are coming back." "I cannot pay much," Lillian admitted, hating how vulnerable it made her feel. "My father left some money, but most of it is tied up in the land and the cattle. I can offer room and board and whatever wages I can spare after I sell off the fall calves." "Room and board is fine for now," Russell said. "We can worry about the rest later. Right now, you have got a fire to put out and horses to round up. Why do not we start with that?" Lillian felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear and loneliness she had been carrying since her father died. She was not alone anymore, at least for now. "The well is behind the house. I will get the buckets." They worked together for the next 3 hours, hauling water to douse the flames and salvaging what little they could from the wreckage. The barn was a total loss, but Russell managed to save some of the tools from the tack room and pulled out several bags of grain that had been protected by a metal storage bin. By the time the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they had rounded up all 6 of Lillian's horses and secured them in a temporary corral Russell built using salvaged lumber and rope from his saddlebags. Lillian stood in the middle of her yard, covered in soot and ash, and surveyed the damage. The barn was nothing but a blackened skeleton, smoke still rising in thin wisps from the ruins. Her fences needed mending. Her cattle were scattered across 2,000 acres, and she had a mortgage payment due in 6 months that she had no idea how to make. But Russell Garrett was standing beside her, rolling up his sleeves despite the cold, and for the first time since her father died, she felt like maybe she had a fighting chance. "Come on," she said, gesturing toward the house. "I will make us some dinner. It is the least I can do." The ranch house was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a main room that served as both living and dining space. Lillian's father had built it himself when he first claimed the land in 1867, and every beam and board had been chosen with care. She lit the lamps and stoked the fire in the cook stove, then pulled out what she had on hand: dried beef, potatoes, onions, and a can of tomatoes. It was not fancy, but it was hot and filling, and Russell ate like a man who had been surviving on trail rations for too long. "When did your father pass?" Russell asked after a while, his voice quiet. 3 months ago," Lillian said, staring into her coffee cup. "Pneumonia. It came on fast, and by the time I got the doctor out here from Kingfisher, it was too late. He was gone within a week." "I am sorry," Russell said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "That is hard, losing family." "Did you lose someone?" Lillian asked, looking up at him. Russell nodded slowly. "My father and older brother. They owned a small ranch up in Kansas. Nothing like this, just 100 acres and some cattle, but it was ours, built with our own hands. Then a big rancher named Colton decided he wanted our water rights, and when my father refused to sell, Colton's men burned us out. My mother had already passed from fever the year before, so it was just the 3 of us. My father and brother died trying to save the horses. I was 18, barely knew which end of a gun was which, and I could not do a damn thing to stop it. Lillian felt her throat tighten. What happened after? I tracked down Colton's foreman, the one who gave the order, Russell said, his eyes going distant. I was not planning to kill him, just wanted answers, wanted justice. But he drew on me first, and I was faster. Spent the next few years drifting, working ranches all over the territory, learning everything I could about cattle and horses and how to protect what is yours. I swore I would never let anyone do to someone else what Colton did to my family. I guess that is why I stopped when I saw your barn burning. Brought back too many memories. I am glad you did, Lillian said softly. Theodore Marsh has been trying to force me out since the day of my father's funeral. He wants this land because it has the best water rights in the county, and he knows I am vulnerable. Everyone in town thinks I should just sell and move back east, find a husband, and settle into a proper woman's life. But this is my life. This land is in my blood. I will not give it up without a fight. Russell met her eyes across the table, and she saw something fierce and determined in his expression. Then we will make sure you do not have to. I meant what I said out there. I am staying at least until spring, until we see this through. Why? Lillian asked, needing to understand. You could ride out tomorrow and find work anywhere. Why risk yourself for a stranger's fight? Russell was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands, because some fights are worth having, even if they are not yours to begin with. And because I have got a feeling about you, Lillian Harper, a feeling that says you are the kind of person who deserves to have someone standing beside her instead of alone. Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she looked away, suddenly flustered. She was 23 years old and had never had much time for courting or romance, too busy helping her father with the ranch. The few men who had shown interest had backed off quickly when they realized she was not the type to simper and bat her eyelashes. But the way Russell looked at her, with respect, and something else she could not quite name, made her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Well then, she said, standing up to clear the dishes, I guess we should get some sleep. Tomorrow we need to start mending fences and doing a proper count of the cattle. I need to know how many head I can sell off in the spring. Sounds like a plan, Russell said, helping her carry the plates to the wash basin. Where do you want me to bunk? I can sleep in the barn if you have got any hay left, or I can make do in the stable with the horses. The barn is ash, and the stable barely has room for the horses as it is, Lillian said, drying her hands on her apron. There is a spare room that was my father's. The sheets are clean, and there is a decent bed. You are welcome to it. Russell hesitated. Are you sure? I do not want people talking. You being a single woman and me staying in the house. Lillian laughed, but there was no humor in it. Russell, Theodore Marsh tried to burn me out and hold a gun to my head today. I think my reputation is the least of my concerns right now. Besides, if you are in the house, at least I know they cannot sneak up on me in the night. Fair point, Russell admitted. All right then, I will take the room and be grateful for it. It has been a while since I slept in a real bed. They said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, and Lillian lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and thinking about the day's events. She kept replaying the moment when Russell appeared on his horse, rifle raised, standing between her and Theodore Marsh like some avenging angel. She barely knew him, had only met him hours ago, but she already felt safer with him around than she had in months. It was a dangerous thing, she knew, to start depending on someone. People left, people died, and in the end, you had to be strong enough to stand alone. But for tonight, just for tonight, she let herself be grateful that she was not alone anymore. The next morning dawned cold and clear, with frost sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Lillian woke before sunrise, the way she always did, and dressed in her work clothes, a split riding skirt, wool shirt, and her father's old leather vest. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up under a wide-brimmed hat, then headed to the kitchen to start breakfast. Russell was already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the horizon with the alertness of a man used to trouble. "Morning," she said, and he turned with a small smile. "Morning, I made coffee. Hope that is all right." "More than all right," Lillian said, pouring herself a cup. "Thank you. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Russell admitted. "It is nice to have a roof over my head and a door that locks. I have been sleeping with one eye open for too long." They ate a quick breakfast of eggs and biscuits, then headed out to survey the property in the light of day. The damage looked even worse than Lillian remembered. The barn was a complete loss. Her fences were cut in at least a dozen places, and when they rode out to check on the cattle, they found several more head missing and the rest scattered across the far pastures. It would take days, maybe weeks, to round them all up and get an accurate count. "How many head should you have?" Russell asked as they sat on their horses on a rise overlooking the eastern pasture. "About 300, give or take," Lillian said. "My father had been building the herd for years. We were supposed to drive 200 head to market this spring, use the money to pay off the mortgage, and have enough left over to get through next year. But with everything that has happened, I do not know if I will have 200 head left to sell." Russell was quiet, studying the landscape with an experienced eye. "We will find them, and we will make sure Marsh does not take any more. But first, we need to fix those fences and secure the perimeter. If your cattle keep wandering off, you will never be able to make that payment." They spent the next week working from dawn to dusk, mending fences and rebuilding the corral. Russell turned out to be exactly what Lillian needed, a skilled ranch hand who knew cattle and horses and could work harder than any man she had ever met. He woke before her every morning, had the horses fed and watered before she finished making breakfast, and never complained about the long hours or the back-breaking labor. More than that, he treated her like an equal, asking her opinion on everything and listening when she talked about her father's methods and the way the ranch had always been run. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and sharing meals in the evening. Lillian found herself looking forward to those quiet dinners when they would sit at the table and talk about everything from cattle breeding to the best routes for driving herds to market. Russell had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and more than once she found herself laughing at some observation he made about the absurdity of life on the frontier. It had been so long since she had laughed that the sound felt foreign at first, but gradually it became easier, more natural. On the 8th day, they rode out before dawn to start rounding up the scattered cattle. It was hard, cold work, pushing through dense brush and rocky terrain to find the strays, but Russell seemed to have an instinct for it. He could read tracks like some men read newspapers, could tell how long ago a cow had passed and which direction it was heading. By midday, they had rounded up 30 head and were driving them back toward the main pasture when Russell suddenly reined in his horse. "What is it?" Lillian asked, pulling up beside him. "Riders," Russell said, pointing toward the northern ridge. "3 of them coming fast." Lillian's stomach tightened as she recognized Theodore Marsh and his sons. They were heading straight for them, and there was nowhere to run with 30 head of cattle in tow. Russell reached down and checked his rifle, his face calm but his eyes hard. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. "And if shooting starts, you drive these cattle back to the ranch as fast as you can. Do not wait for me." "I am not leaving you," Lillian said, her hand moving to the pistol on her hip. Her father had taught her to shoot, and she was not about to hide while Russell fought her battles. "Lillian," Russell said, and the way he said her name, soft and urgent, made her look at him. "Please, I need to know you are safe. I cannot focus if I am worrying about you." Before she could argue, Theodore and his sons reached them, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Theodore's face was twisted with anger, and Marcus had his hand on his gun. "I thought I told you to get off this land, Harper," Theodore said, ignoring Russell entirely. "Every cow you round up is just delaying the inevitable. Come spring, this will all be mine anyway." "You do not own this land yet," Lillian shot back, "and you will not. Not if I have anything to say about it. You do not have anything to say about it, Theodore sneered. You are just a woman playing at ranching. This is a man's world, and you do not belong in it. Russell's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Seems to me she is doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. She has got more grit than most men I have met, and she sure as hell does not need your permission to run her own ranch. Theodore finally turned to look at Russell, his eyes cold. You should have kept riding, boy. This does not concern you. It concerns me when you come onto her property and threaten her, Russell said, his hand resting casually on his rifle. Now, unless you have got legal business here, I suggest you turn around and head back to town. Marcus urged his horse forward, his hand still on his gun. Maybe we should teach this hired gun some manners, Pa. Show him what happens to people who stick their nose where it does not belong. Russell did not move, did not even blink, but Lillian saw the shift in his posture, the way his body went still and coiled like a spring. Go ahead and try, he said softly. But I promise you, it will not end the way you think. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then Theodore held up his hand, stopping Marcus before he could draw. This is not worth it. We will get what we want come spring, one way or another. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts, Harper. It will not last long. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his sons following behind him. Lillian watched them go, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. When they were out of sight, she let out a breath she did not know she was holding. That was close, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Too close, Russell agreed, his eyes still on the horizon. He is not going to give up, Lillian. You know that, right? He is going to keep coming at you until he gets what he wants or until someone stops him permanently. I know, Lillian said quietly. My father always said Theodore Marsh was like a dog with a bone. Once he sets his sights on something, he does not let go. Russell turned to look at her, his expression serious. Then we need to make sure you can make that spring payment. If you can pay off the mortgage, he loses his legal claim to the land. It is the only way to beat him for good. I need to sell 200 head to make the payment, Lillian said, doing the math in her head. At current market prices, that should be enough to cover the mortgage and have a little left over, but I need to find 200 healthy head first. And with everything that has happened, I do not know if I have that many left. Then we will find out, Russell said firmly. We will spend the next few months rounding up every last cow on this property, and we will make sure they are all in prime condition for the drive. And if we come up short, we will figure something out. But we are not giving up, and we are sure as hell not giving Theodore Marsh the satisfaction of seeing you fail. The determination in his voice made something warm bloom in Lillian's chest. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw more than just a hired hand. She saw a man who believed in her, who was willing to fight for her, not because he wanted something from her, but because he thought she deserved to succeed. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not shown up when you did. Russell reached over and touched her hand, just a brief contact, but it sent electricity racing through her veins. You would have figured it out. You are stronger than you think, Lillian Harper. I am just here to make sure you do not have to figure it out alone. They drove the cattle back to the ranch in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from understanding and shared purpose. When they got back, they spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the new fences and setting up a watch schedule to make sure Theodore did not try anything else. Russell insisted on taking the first watch, and Lillian was too tired to argue. She went inside, heated water for a bath, and let herself soak away the aches and tension of the day. As she lay in the warm water, she found herself thinking about Russell, about the way he looked at her like she was capable of anything, about the strength in his hands and the gentleness in his voice. She had not thought about romance or marriage in years, too focused on survival and the ranch to have time for such things. But now, with Russell under her roof and by her side every day, she found herself wanting things she had not let herself want before. It was dangerous, she knew. He was a drifter, a man with no roots and no plans beyond helping her through the winter. Come spring, he would probably move on, and she would be alone again. But for now, for these few precious months, she let herself imagine what it might be like to have him stay. The weeks blurred together in a flurry of hard work and small victories. They rounded up more cattle, mended more fences, and slowly but surely brought the ranch back under control. Russell proved to be invaluable in ways Lillian had not even anticipated. He was good with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish mare, and he had a gift for reading cattle, knowing which ones were healthy and which ones needed extra attention. He also turned out to be a decent carpenter, and together they started rebuilding the barn, working in the cold November air with their breath fogging in front of them. By the time December arrived, they had accounted for 263 head of cattle, more than Lillian had dared to hope for. It was enough, more than enough, to make the spring payment and have money left over for supplies and repairs. For the first time since her father died, Lillian felt like she might actually be able to pull this off. Christmas came on a Sunday, cold and bright, and Lillian woke to find Russell in the kitchen making breakfast. He had somehow managed to procure eggs, bacon, and even a small ham from town, along with flour and sugar for biscuits. When she came into the room, he turned with a smile that made her heart skip. "Merry Christmas," he said, gesturing to the spread on the table. "I know it is not much, but I figured we deserve something special after the past few months." "It is perfect," Lillian said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She had not celebrated Christmas since her father died, had not even thought about it, too focused on survival to care about holidays. But Russell had thought about it, had gone into town and spent his own money to make the day special for her. They ate together, laughing and talking, and afterward Russell pulled a small package from his coat pocket. "I got you something," he said, looking almost shy. "It is not much, but I saw it in the mercantile and thought of you." Lillian unwrapped the package with trembling fingers and found a beautiful leather-bound journal with blank pages. On the first page, Russell had written in neat script, for Lillian Harper, who was writing her own story. "Russell," she breathed, running her fingers over the inscription. "This is the nicest gift anyone has ever given me. I figured you might want to keep a record of the ranch, for the future," Russell said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Your father started something amazing here, and you are continuing it. That is worth writing down." Lillian looked up at him, and before she could stop herself, she reached out and took his hand. "I got you something too," she said softly. She pulled out a small bundle she had hidden in the cupboard and handed it to him. Inside was a new pair of leather gloves, lined with soft wool, and a warm scarf she had knitted herself during the long evenings. Russell stared at the gifts, his throat working. "You made this?" he asked, holding up the scarf. "I did," Lillian said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have something to keep you warm. You have given me so much, Russell. You have given me hope when I had none, and you have worked yourself to the bone for a ranch that is not even yours. I wanted to give you something that showed how much I appreciate it." Russell looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. He set down the gifts and took both of her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. "Lillian, I need to tell you something. I know I said I was just passing through, that I was only staying until spring, but the truth is I do not want to leave. I have been drifting for 7 years, moving from place to place, never putting down roots because I was afraid of losing everything again like I did in Kansas. But being here with you, working this ranch, it has made me realize that running from loss is not the same as living. And I want to live, Lillian. I want to stay here and help you build something real, something that lasts." Lillian's heart was racing so fast, she thought it might burst from her chest. "What are you saying, Russell?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you," Russell said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I cannot help how I feel. You are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I have ever met, and every day I spend with you makes me more certain that I do not want to spend my days with anyone else. I love you, Lillian Harper, and I want to be with you, if you will have me." Lillian felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to say it, afraid that you would leave and I would be left with a broken heart. But I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Russell Garrett, and I want you to stay, not just until spring, but forever." Russell let out a shaky laugh and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She did not care. She buried her face in his chest and let herself cry, all the fear and loneliness and grief of the past months pouring out of her in great, shuddering sobs. Russell held her through it all, his hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort and love. When she finally pulled back, her face wet with tears, Russell cupped her cheeks in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a promise of all the days to come, and Lillian felt her whole body come alive with sensation. She had been kissed before, a few clumsy attempts by boys in town when she was younger, but nothing like this. This was like coming home after a long journey, like finding something she had not even known she was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Russell rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know we should probably wait, but I do not want to wait. I want everyone to know that you are mine, and I am yours. I want to build a life with you, Lillian. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. Marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never fail, never falter, never have to face the world alone." Lillian laughed through her tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Russell Garrett." They spent the rest of Christmas Day together, making plans and dreaming about the future. They would get married in the spring, after the cattle drive, after the mortgage was paid. They would rebuild the barn together, expand the ranch, maybe even start a family someday. It all seemed possible now, with Russell by her side. January and February passed in a blur of preparations. They continued working the ranch, but now there was a new energy between them, a sense of excitement and anticipation. Russell moved his belongings into Lillian's room, and they spent the cold winter nights curled up together, talking about their plans and dreams. Lillian had never been happier, had never felt more complete, but Theodore Marsh had not given up. In late February, he rode out to the ranch again, this time with the sheriff in tow. Lillian and Russell were mending a section of fence when they saw the riders approaching. "Sheriff Dalton," Lillian said, wiping her hands on her pants. "What brings you out here?" The sheriff was an older man, grizzled and weathered, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Harper, Mr. Marsh here has filed a complaint. He says you have been stealing his cattle, mixing them in with your herd." Lillian felt her blood run cold. "That is a lie. Every head of cattle on this property belongs to me. I have the brands to prove it." "Then you would not mind if we took a look?" Theodore said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Just to make sure there has been no mistake." Russell stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You are welcome to look, but you are not going to find anything. Miss Harper runs an honest operation." They spent the next 2 hours going through the herd, checking brands and counting heads. To Lillian's immense relief, every single cow bore the Harper brand, a distinctive H with a cross through it. Theodore's face grew darker with each passing minute, and by the time they finished, he looked ready to explode with fury. "Satisfied?" Lillian asked, crossing her arms. Sheriff Dalton nodded slowly. "Everything appears to be in order, Miss Harper. I apologize for the inconvenience." He turned to Theodore with a hard look. "Mr. Marsh, I will thank you not to waste my time with false accusations. If I find out you have been harassing Miss Harper, we are going to have a serious problem." Theodore opened his mouth to argue, but the sheriff cut him off with a raised hand. I mean it, Marsh. I have known John Harper for 20 years, and he was as honest as they come. I have got no reason to believe his daughter is any different. Now mount up and head back to town before I decide to charge you with filing a false report. Theodore and his sons rode off in sullen silence, and the sheriff tipped his hat to Lillian. You are doing a fine job here, Miss Harper. Your father would be proud, and it is good to see you have got help now. He glanced at Russell with an approving nod. You take care of her, son. I intend to, sir, Russell said, slipping his arm around Lillian's waist. After the sheriff left, Lillian sagged against Russell, her legs suddenly weak. That was too close. If he had found even one cow with a different brand, Theodore could have claimed I was stealing. But he did not, Russell said firmly, because you are not a thief and everyone knows it. Theodore is getting desperate, Lillian. That is a good sign. It means he knows he is losing and he is running out of options. I hope you are right, Lillian said quietly, because I do not know how much more of this I can take. Russell turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Listen to me. We are going to make it through this. In 2 months, we are going to drive those cattle to market, pay off that mortgage, and put an end to Theodore Marsh's plans once and for all. And then we are going to get married and spend the rest of our lives building something beautiful together. Do you believe me? Lillian looked into his eyes and saw nothing but love and determination. I believe you, she said. I believe in us. March arrived with warmer weather and the promise of spring. The cattle were fat and healthy, ready for the drive to market. Russell had been planning the route for weeks, studying maps and talking to other ranchers about the best trails. They would drive the herd to Wichita, about 150 miles northeast, where the railhead would take the cattle to buyers in Chicago and Kansas City. It would take about 2 weeks, maybe 3 if the weather turned bad, but the prices in Wichita were good, and Lillian would get top dollar for her beef. The night before they were set to leave, Lillian stood on the porch of her ranch house, looking out at the land her father had built, and she had fought so hard to keep. Russell came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Nervous? He asked softly. Terrified, Lillian admitted. Everything depends on this drive. If something goes wrong, if we lose the herd or the prices drop, I could lose everything. We are not going to lose the herd, Russell said firmly. I have hired 2 good hands to help us, men I worked with in Texas who know how to handle cattle, and you are one of the best riders I have ever seen. We are going to get those cattle to Wichita, sell them for a good price, and come home with enough money to pay off Theodore Marsh and still have plenty left over. Trust me, Lillian. Trust us. Lillian turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that single kiss. I do trust you. I trust us. Let us do this. They set out at dawn, driving 200 head of cattle north toward Wichita. The 2 hands Russell had hired, a pair of brothers named Jack and Tom, were skilled drovers who knew how to keep the herd moving without spooking them. The days were long and dusty, filled with the constant bawling of cattle and the thunder of hooves, but Lillian had never felt more alive. She rode beside Russell, working in perfect tandem, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel optimistic about the future. The drive went smoothly for the first week. They made good time, covering 15 to 20 miles a day, and the weather held. But on the 8th day, they ran into trouble. A group of men blocked the trail ahead, 5 of them, all armed and looking like trouble. Lillian recognized the one in front immediately. It was Marcus Marsh, Theodore's eldest son, and he had brought friends. Well, well, Marcus said, urging his horse forward. Look what we have here, Miss Harper and her hired gun moving cattle to market. That is a nice herd you have got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. Russell moved his horse in front of Lillian, his hand resting on his rifle. You are in our way, Marsh. Move aside, or we will move you. Marcus laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think you are tough, Garrett? You think you can protect her from all of us? My father sent us to make sure these cattle do not reach Wichita. He figures if Miss Harper defaults on her loan, the bank can seize the property legal-like, and nobody can say he did anything wrong. Your father is a coward and a bully, Lillian said, her voice shaking with anger. And so are you. Get out of our way, or so help me God, I will shoot you myself. Marcus's smile faded, and he reached for his gun. But before he could draw, Russell's rifle was up and pointed directly at his chest. Do not, Russell said quietly. I will put you down before you clear leather, and your friends here will be next. Is your father's ambition really worth dying for? Jack and Tom rode up beside Russell, their own rifles at the ready. The 5 men blocking the trail looked at each other, suddenly uncertain. They might have had superior numbers, but Russell and his men had the drop on them, and Marcus knew it. This is not over, Marcus said, backing his horse away. My father will get what he wants, one way or another. Tell your father that if he sends anyone else after us, I will come for him personally, Russell said, his voice hard as iron. And I promise you, he will not like the outcome. Marcus and his men rode off, and Lillian let out a shaky breath. Thank you, she said to Jack and Tom. I am sorry you got dragged into this. Jack, the older of the 2 brothers, grinned. Hell, Miss Harper, that is what you are paying us for. Besides, I do not like bullies. Never have. We will see you through to Wichita. Do not you worry. They pushed on, moving the herd faster now, knowing that Marcus might come back with more men. But they made it through the next few days without incident, and finally, on the 14th day, they crested a hill and saw Wichita spread out before them, the railhead gleaming in the afternoon sun. Lillian felt tears of relief streaming down her face. They had made it. Against all odds, they had actually made it. Russell rode up beside her and took her hand, squeezing gently. We did it, he said, his voice full of pride and love. You did it, Lillian. The cattle sold for even more than Lillian had hoped. The buyers were eager for prime beef, and the Harper herd was some of the best they had seen all season. When the final tallies were done, Lillian had enough money to pay off her mortgage in full, with enough left over to rebuild the barn, buy supplies for the next year, and still have a comfortable cushion in the bank. They stayed in Wichita for 2 days, resting and resupplying, and on the second night, Russell took Lillian to a small restaurant in town. It was nothing fancy, just a simple place with checkered tablecloths and good, honest food, but it felt like a palace to Lillian after weeks on the trail. I have been thinking, Russell said as they ate, we should get married here in Wichita before we head home. I do not want to wait any longer, Lillian. I want to make this official, want to be able to call you my wife. Lillian felt her heart swell with happiness. Are you sure? I always thought I would get married at the ranch, with the mountains in the background and the land my father built as witness. We can have another ceremony there if you want, Russell said, reaching across the table to take her hands. But I want to marry you now today, before anything else can go wrong. I want to know that no matter what happens, we are bound together, husband and wife, partners in everything. Please, Lillian, say yes. Lillian looked into his eyes and saw her whole future reflected back at her. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Let us get married today. They found a preacher that afternoon, a kind older man who agreed to perform the ceremony in his small church. Jack and Tom stood as witnesses, both of them grinning from ear to ear. Lillian wore her best dress, the one she had packed for selling the cattle, and Russell wore a clean shirt and had even trimmed his beard. They stood before the preacher and spoke their vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the days of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Russell kissed Lillian with such tenderness and passion that she forgot where they were, forgot everything but the feel of his lips on hers, and the knowledge that she was his and he was hers, now and forever. They rode back to Kingfisher as husband and wife, taking their time and enjoying the journey. When they finally crested the hill overlooking the Harper Ranch, Lillian felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was home. This was where she belonged, where they both belonged. The first thing they did was ride into town and march straight into Theodore Marsh's bank. Lillian walked up to the counter and slapped down a bank draft for the full amount of her mortgage, paid in full with interest. Theodore came out of his office, his face going red when he saw her. "What is this?" "My mortgage payment," Lillian said calmly. "Paid in full." "The Harper Ranch is free and clear, Mr. Marsh. You have no claim to my land, now or ever." Theodore snatched up the bank draft, his hands shaking with rage. "This is not possible. You could not have sold enough cattle to cover this." "But I did," Lillian said, unable to keep the triumph from her voice. "And I have the receipts to prove it. So unless you have some other legal business with me, I will be taking my deed and going home." The bank clerk, a nervous young man who had clearly been enjoying the scene, produced the deed and handed it to Lillian with a smile. She took it and turned to leave, but Russell stopped her with a hand on her arm. One more thing," Russell said, turning to face Theodore. "If you or your sons ever set foot on the Harper Ranch again, if you ever threaten my wife or try to sabotage her property, I will make sure the sheriff knows exactly what you have been up to. Arson, attempted theft, intimidation, filing false police reports. I have been keeping a record of everything, and I have witnesses to back it up. So unless you want to spend the rest of your life in jail, I suggest you leave us alone." Theodore looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight had gone out of him. He had lost, and he knew it. "Get out of my bank," he said through gritted teeth. Lillian and Russell walked out into the bright spring sunshine, and Lillian could not stop smiling. She turned to Russell and threw her arms around his neck, kissing him right there on Main Street for all the world to see. "We did it," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We actually did it." "You did it," Russell said, holding her close. "I just helped." "No," Lillian said firmly, pulling back to look into his eyes. "We did it together. I never could have done this without you, Russell. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You believed in me when no one else did. You fought for me when I was too tired to fight for myself, and you loved me when I thought I was too broken to be loved. You are my partner, my husband, my everything, and I am going to spend the rest of my life showing you how grateful I am that you rode into my life that day." Russell kissed her again, soft and sweet, and Lillian felt her whole body relax into his embrace. They were home, they were together, and they were finally safe. The next few years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Russell proved to be everything Lillian could have hoped for in a partner. He was tireless in his efforts to improve the ranch, building a new barn that was twice the size of the old one, expanding the herd and introducing new breeding techniques he had learned in Texas. Together, they built the Harper Ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory, known for quality cattle and honest dealings. In the fall of 1888, Lillian discovered she was pregnant. She told Russell one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the look of joy on his face was something she would never forget. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach, and whispered promises to their unborn child about all the adventures they would have together. Their son was born in May of 1889, a healthy, squalling baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him John, after Lillian's father, and Russell cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with the miracle of it all. Lillian watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart swell with a love so profound it took her breath away. This was what her father had wanted for her, she realized. Not just the land or the ranch, but a life filled with love and purpose and family. She had fought so hard to keep the land, but in the end, it was not the land that saved her. It was Russell and the love they built together. As little John grew, the ranch thrived. Russell taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and by the time he was 3, he was following his parents around the property, asking endless questions about the cattle and the horses. In 1892, they had a daughter, a tiny, fierce little girl they named Rose, and 2 years after that, another son they called William. The house was filled with laughter and noise and the chaos that comes with raising children, and Lillian had never been happier. She would often stand at the window, watching Russell play with the children in the yard, teaching them to rope and ride, and feel a sense of contentment that bordered on the divine. This was the life she had fought for, the life she had nearly lost, and she treasured every moment of it. Theodore Marsh never bothered them again. He sold the bank a few years later and moved to Texas, a broken and bitter man. His sons scattered to the winds, and Kingfisher moved on without them. The town grew and prospered, and the Harper Ranch became a cornerstone of the community, known for employing fair wages and treating their workers with respect. Jack and Tom, the brothers who had helped with the cattle drive, stayed on as permanent hands. They built their own small houses on the edge of the property and became part of the extended Harper family. Over the years, they trained new hands, expanded the operation, and became invaluable partners in the ranch's success. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Russell surprised Lillian with a trip to Wichita, leaving the children in the capable hands of Jack and Tom. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in fancy restaurants, and spent their days walking through the bustling city streets, holding hands like young lovers. On their last night, they returned to the little church where they had been married, and Russell renewed his vows to her, promising to love her for another 10 years, and another 10 after that, and all the years beyond. "I never imagined my life could be this good," Lillian said as they stood in the empty church, the evening light streaming through the windows. "When my father died, I thought I had lost everything. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life fighting just to survive. But then you came along and showed me that life could be about more than just survival. You taught me how to live again, Russell. You gave me a family, a future, a reason to wake up every morning with a smile on my face. I love you more now than I did the day we got married, and I will love you more with every day that passes." Russell cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining with tears. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lillian Garrett. You took a broken drifter and gave him a home, a purpose, a reason to be better than he was. You are my heart, my soul, my everything. And I promise you, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me." They kissed in that little church, sealing their promises with the same passion and tenderness that had carried them through 10 years of marriage. When they finally pulled apart, Lillian rested her head on Russell's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle sickness and market fluctuations, but Lillian and Russell faced every obstacle together, their partnership stronger than anything life could throw at them. They taught their children the value of hard work and honest dealing, and as John, Rose, and William grew, they each found their own place on the ranch. John, the eldest, had his grandfather's head for business and his father's skill with horses. By the time he was 18, he was managing the breeding program and had developed a reputation throughout Oklahoma for producing some of the finest quarter horses in the territory. Rose was fearless and stubborn, with a natural gift for training animals and a soft heart for anything in need of care. She started a small veterinary practice, traveling to neighboring ranches to tend to sick livestock, and became one of the most respected animal doctors in the region. William, the youngest, inherited his mother's love of the land itself and spent his days working on soil conservation and water management, ensuring the ranch would remain productive for generations to come. In 1905, when Lillian was 41 years old and Russell was 43, they sat on the porch of their home and watched the sun set over the land they had built together. Their children were grown, the ranch was thriving, and they had grandchildren on the way. John had recently married a sweet-natured schoolteacher from Kingfisher, and Rose was courting a young veterinarian from Guthrie. "Can you believe it has been 18 years since that day Theodore Marsh tried to take everything from us?" Lillian asked, leaning against Russell's shoulder. "Feels like a lifetime ago," Russell said, wrapping his arm around her. "And also like yesterday. I still remember the first time I saw you, standing in your yard with that barn burning behind you, refusing to give up even with a gun to your head. I knew right then that you were someone special, someone worth fighting for. I was so scared, Lillian admitted. I put on a brave face, but inside I was terrified. I thought I was going to lose everything my father built, everything I loved. And then you showed up like some kind of miracle, and you made me believe that I could actually win. You gave me hope, Russell. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Russell corrected gently. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to stop running. You made me believe I deserved to be happy, that I deserved to have something good in my life. We built this together, Lillian. Every fence post, every calf, every sunrise and sunset. This is our life, our legacy, and I would not change a single moment of it. Lillian turned to kiss him, this man who had ridden into her life when she needed him most and had stayed by her side through everything. His hair was shot through with silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was just as handsome as the day they met. More so even because now she knew every inch of him, knew his heart and soul as well as her own. I love you, Russell Garrett, she said softly. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. And I love you, Lillian Garrett, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Forever and always. They sat together as the stars came out one by one, painting the sky in brilliant points of light. From inside the house, they could hear the laughter of their children as they prepared dinner, the sound of family and love and life continuing on. This was what they had fought for, what they had nearly died for. Not just the land or the cattle or the money, but this moment, this feeling of being exactly where they belonged. In the spring of 1906, John and his wife welcomed their first child, a baby girl they named Lillian after her grandmother. When they placed the tiny, squirming bundle in Lillian's arms, she looked down at her namesake and felt the circle complete. This child would grow up on the Harper Ranch, would learn to ride and rope and love the land the way Lillian had, the way her father had before her. The legacy would continue, passed down through generations, a testament to the love and determination of two people who refused to give up. Russell stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and they looked at their grandchild together. Your grandfather would be so proud, he said softly, of you, of what you have built, of the family you have raised. We did good, Lillian. We did real good. We did, Lillian agreed, tears streaming down her face. We did better than good. We did something amazing. As the years went on, Lillian and Russell slowly stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting their children take over while they enjoyed their grandchildren and the fruits of their decades of labor. They would still ride out together every morning, checking fences and watching the cattle. But now it was more about being together than about the work itself. On a warm evening in June of 1910, as they celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary, Lillian stood before Russell and their entire family and gave a speech that she had been thinking about for weeks. When I was 23 years old, she began, her voice strong and clear, I thought my life was over. My father had died, men were trying to steal my land, and I was alone and terrified. I had decided that I would fight until my last breath, but I did not think I could actually win. And then a cowboy rode into my yard, pointed his rifle at the men threatening me, and changed my life forever. She turned to look at Russell, who was watching her with eyes full of love. This man, my husband, gave me everything. He gave me hope when I had none, strength when I was weak, and love when I thought I was unlovable. He fought beside me, worked beside me, and built a life with me that surpasses my wildest dreams. Together, we proved that determination and love can overcome any obstacle, that a woman can run a successful ranch, and that a drifter with a scarred past can find redemption and peace. She raised her glass, and the rest of the family followed suit. To Russell Garrett, the best cowboy, the best husband, and the best man I have ever known. Thank you for making sure I never failed. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being mine." The family cheered and drank, and Russell came to her side, pulling her into his arms. "Thank you for letting me stay," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for seeing past the broken man I was to the man I could become. Thank you for loving me, for believing in me, for giving me a reason to live instead of just survive. You are my everything, Lillian Garrett, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." They danced that night under the stars, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, the ranch house glowing with lamplight behind them. The land stretched out in all directions, 2,000 acres of prime Oklahoma prairie that they had fought for, worked for, and built together. It was their legacy, their gift to the future, and it would stand for generations as a testament to what two people could accomplish when they refused to give up on each other. Years later, when Lillian was an old woman with silver hair and Russell was gray and weathered but still strong, they would sit on that same porch and tell their grandchildren stories about the early days. They would talk about Theodore Marsh and the burned barn, about the cattle drive to Wichita and their wedding in the little church. They would talk about the hard winters and the good years, the births and the losses, the moments of fear and the moments of triumph. But mostly they would talk about love, about how love could sustain you through the darkest times, how it could give you strength when you had none left, how it could turn a failed ranch into a thriving legacy and a lonely cowboy into the patriarch of a sprawling, happy family. They would talk about how they had been two broken people who found each other at exactly the right moment, and how that single moment of chance had changed the course of both their lives forever. And on a quiet spring morning in 1925, when Lillian was 61 and Russell was 63, they rode out together one last time to the hill where her father was buried. They stood side by side, looking out over the ranch that sprawled below them, and Russell took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for giving me a life worth living." "Thank you," Lillian replied, squeezing his hand, "for making sure I never failed, for loving me, for staying." They stood there for a long time, two old souls who had weathered every storm together and come out stronger for it. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the sounds of cattle lowing and children laughing and life continuing on. This was their legacy, their triumph, their happily ever after. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold, Lillian and Russell walked back down the hill together, hand in hand, knowing that whatever time they had left would be spent exactly as they had spent the last 38 years, together, in love, and home at last. The Harper Ranch continued to thrive for decades after, passing from generation to generation, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But it all started with a woman who refused to fail and a cowboy who made sure she never did. Their love story became legend in Oklahoma, a tale told around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that true love and determination could conquer any obstacle, and that sometimes the greatest victories came not from standing alone, but from finding the right person to stand beside you. And that, in the end, was the real triumph. Not the land, not the cattle, not even the legacy they left behind, but the love they shared and the life they built together. It was a love that lasted through decades, through hardships and joys, through youth and old age. It was a love that transformed two broken people into something whole, something beautiful, something eternal. They had waited for her to fail so they could take her land. But the cowboy made sure she never failed them, and in doing so, he gave her something far more valuable than property or money or success. He gave her love, partnership, and a future filled with hope. Together, they proved that with enough determination and the right person by your side, anything was possible, and they lived happily ever after, exactly as they deserved.